Oh, working. That's awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to see so many faces here. So far, we've got 16 participants.
Excellent.
Okay. Eva, do you think you can maybe just keep an eye on any of the questions in the chat? I've got both open, but just in case, maybe you can be the person who moderates the questions from the chat.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Should I also record from my side just in case?
I'm actually just about to hit record as we speak.
I guess it gets recorded on YouTube as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm just doing a recording in Zoom just in case something bad happens. Like, I don't know, YouTube goes away or something. Okay.
Someone plays a tiny snippet of pop music, the whole thing gets taken down.
What? Oh no.
Right.
As in someone plays a tiny snippet of pop music and the whole thing gets taken down.
Yeah, exactly.
Hazard with YouTube.
Okay, well, what do you think? Should we get started? We've got a nice little group here. I think it'd be fun. Okay, just in hopes of keeping on track. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Jane Tingley and I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 Department of Computational Arts lecture series. Before we get started, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the land that we're living on. And I understand that we're all in different parts of the world and that there are different treaties that we should recognize as a result. But for now, I'm going to focus on the land that houses York University and Toronto. I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations, and to recognize their long-standing relationship with these territories on which York University campuses are located that precedes the establishment of York University. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, and we acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region, which we are very thankful of. And also, as a side, I'd also like to recognize, especially now at this moment in time, that we are indebted to the peoples whose land host the infrastructure that we use to teach our classes in our daily virtual communications. For example, Zoom has erected its headquarters in San Jose, California, and Skype has erected one key arm of its operations in Palo Alto, California. So this is the traditional territory of the Muwekma Aloan tribal nation. Current members of this nation are direct descendants of the many missionized tribal groups from across that region. So we, who are able to connect with each other over Zoom and over Skype, are deeply indebted to the Muwekma Alona people, as the lands and the waters they continue to steward now support the people, the pipelines, and the technologies that carry our breaths, our images, and our words across vast distances to reach each other. So with that said, I would like to begin our 2021 lecture series, and I'd like to welcome you all here. Thank you very much for coming. While COVID has had many negative outcomes in our lives, from social isolation to the stay-at-home order that we all find ourselves in right now, it's with great joy that I can point to the one key positive, or one of the key positives that the pandemic has brought. Specifically, it's become the norm now to give talks and classes online. And now, perhaps more than ever, we can profit from this and invite excellent artists from around the world to give talks. We no longer have to wait for this sort of serendipitous moment where the artist happens to be coming to Toronto. We can just invite them to pop in on Zoom and share their work with us. So on that note, it is with very great pleasure that I introduce you to Kok Yoong, an artist presently living in Malaysia. Welcome. Who has kindly agreed to get up at 6 a.m. I'm going to repeat this, 6 a.m. on a Saturday to be here. So I think, first of all, we should all give a virtual applause to Kok Yoong for waking up at 6 a.m. and being here with us today. So Lim Kok Yoong is a senior lecturer in Media Arts Department in the Faculty of Creative Multimedia at the Multimedia University in Malaysia. His work investigates the mind, media, environments, and material processes through theoretical and practical practice-based work, which draws on his interest in the existential perception of the human condition. His work often engages with the concept of presence, a theme that informs much of the debate that revolves around the concept of embodiment and, of course, disembodiment in the age of cybernetics. His work addresses his concern and ideas about a new space-time consciousness that is shaped by the technologies that are shaking our very psychology of presence by manipulating the condition of perception. His other research interests include digital memory, digital archiving, digital mapping, media aesthetics, and media curation. So Kok Yoong is here to speak with us today about his work for about 1 hour, and then we will end with Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kok Yoong.
Thanks, Jane, for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation for me to be a speaker in your forum. I hope everyone are staying positive and coping well with the COVID pandemic. The topic that I'm going to talk about today, it's being here and there. There's a bit of a typo play over there. The subtopics, existential media in post-virtual geophilia. That's actually my PhD topics. There's no better time than a COVID pandemic, to talk about our existence. So before...
we're not seeing your screen. Sorry to interrupt.
Don't worry. Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to show you some of the works that I've done and also some works that I'm working on at the moment. But before I go into show the works, I'm going to talk about the philosophical underpinning of my research and also my projects, which mainly revolving around the metaphysical ideas of existence. What is the meaning of existence? How do we come to doubt of it? How do we become conscious of our selfhood? As we all know, our contemporary life is divided between the physical and virtual. I'm also asking the questions, how can media technology offer us a new mode of perceptions of our existence in our time, right? With respect to global, local, or corporeal frame of reference. While I'm showing some of the projects that I've done in the past, I will also use that opportunity to talk about the role, a different role of technologies and media in assisting or augmenting the faculties in which we use to perceive our own existence, to articulate or reveal our perceptions through aesthetic project, in hoping so that, it will actually help us to gain a reflexive sense of being. For a start, on the background, I'll begin with existentialism, which is a branch of philosophical thinking started in the late 19th or 20th, late 19th and 20th century. It's a philosophical movement which emphasizes on individual existence, freedom, and choice. Yeah, there are several philosophical positions all related to existential philosophy. But the main identifiable common proposition is that it look at man as objects of thoughts and observation. Yeah. So the key figure in this philosophical movement, it's Descartes, who first established a man position as a being, who can not only think, but also think about his own thinking, All right. So when I come across this philosophy, is pretty problematic for me. So it took me a while to actually digest and relate this to my work. Yeah. So basically, put it in a nutshell, he says, we can actually observe ourselves in the act of observing. So that put man in a positions where man is simultaneously the subjects and objects of thoughts and observation. So it's a philosophical thinking that begins that look at human subjects. All right. But these academic philosophies sometimes can be too abstract and remote from concrete experience. In the East, I try to relate this to my own background and also my own the Eastern philosophy. Maybe the closest things that I can find it's is the idea of soul, right? It's a pretty abstract idea, but in the West, um, um, the explanation is much more scientific. So, for example, the idea of homunculus, right, which is a representation of a small human being. In the mid 20th century, the scientists were looking for a scientific basis for the existence of human soul. So homunculus is an inner brain structure with the size of a pine nut, called the pineal gland, right? This leads to philosophers to believe that in our body there's some kind of metaphysical quality. Another popular association, it's with the concept of third eye in Hinduism, all right, or the chakra, right, which is comparable to Cartesian theater. If you know the movie Inside Out, you know that you actually have a mastermind in your brain, which do all this control of your cognitive function. So this is the metaphysical foundation, which is the premise of most of my research and projects, addressing on the quality that institutes of one's individuality, as in how do I know who I am, how do I exist here and now. The Cartesian Cogito laid the foundations for dualism that engender many discourses on the relationship between cognitions and actions. But the weakness in this argument is that the notion of a master area of a brain that would be capable of understanding what is being perceived, as in much as there would still be the question of who was actually looking at the image, from the master area. So Heidegger, right, existential phenomenology extends existential being into a phenomenon being. So it's another philosophical school of thoughts, which look at individual not only as a thinking subject, but also a subject that act and respond, right, to the phenomenon that surrounds him or her, right? So in a way, the phenomenology has removed the illusions of world behind the scene by simply saying existence has no hidden nature. It is the phenomenon that where all the forms of human sensibility arise from, right? We respond to the phenomenon of our surrounding. So phenomenon transcends the phenomenon of being. If that is consciousness, there must be a perception that leads and contributed to the emergence of consciousness, right? So that set apart the difference between a being by thinking and being by perceiving or being by doing. So it simply says we are merely a respondent to the phenomenon. So this leads me to think about compare this to the idea of artificial intelligence, right? When artificial intelligence or AI begins, all the scientists were busy, trying to come up with a supercomputer that's able to do all this computing. But right now we see the trend of artificial intelligence is to, build all these sensors and train them to learn to perceive. All right. So this echo with a scholar's idea, Sami Zeki, who study the neural correlates of different cognitive states. It's his proposition is that consciousness is mainly an emergent property. Yeah. So consciousness is always a conscious of something, and it is defined in relation to something. All right. So based on the examination of the nature of phenomenon, there are two types of reality which lie beyond our conscious experience. One is the being of the object of consciousness. That's much more on a Platonic realm, right? A reality in the mental state. And another one would be the consciousness itself, which is the reality, the physical reality, right? But the reality that we are living in right now is further complicated by, virtual, that they create a difference between here in the physical reality and there in the virtual realm. All right. So for me, this is a very exciting moment because it gives, we are living in a time where we can relook into all these um, um, philosophical questions again. And what's more interesting is that the cyberspace, it's I see it as a metaphysical laboratory that allows us to experiment with this idea of identity, of reality, and so on and so forth. Um, The philosophy of existentialism has always been an influential undercurrent in arts, and human existential anxiety often becomes a recurring subject in art. Through arts, artists questions and express the meaning, purpose, or value of existence. The subjective existence purported by Descartes, I think, therefore I am, has dominated our understanding of consciousness for nearly 4 centuries. Yeah. However, in this digital era, the cyberspace and the internet connectivity is increasing the fluidity between the physical world and virtual world. Right. The result is a seamless experience that requires to merge the body and mind as one. So sometimes we need to embody our physical reality, but sometimes you also need to disembody, right? To have a disembodied experience in the cyberspace. So this extends the narrative for individual subjects to include the possibility of multidimensional understanding of self and also consciousness. So this present to me as an artist to um, and a new potential to rethink the mind body problems and to relook into the legacy of earlier existentialist approach to mind body and phenomenon. This is one of the earliest project that I've done. It's called When You Are Not Your Body. It was exhibited in a small gallery in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia in 2008. It's my solo exhibition and also my only solo exhibition. When You're Not Your Body is a little metaphysical adventure, explaining and challenging the nature of being and the world. It is an absurd proposal that involves a curious form of disembodiment. So bear in mind, in 2008, this is the whole idea of cyberspace, and uh, uh, it's still a pretty, in fact, the whole cyber development, right, in the country is still at a very infantry stage, right? We just begin to look at, um, um, the disembodied lifestyle. So this is an absurd proposal that involves a curious form of disembodiment, in which the viewer are invited to become a perceptual monad rather than a physical presence. So I created environments where audience have an opportunity to have an out-of-body experience, right? And the experience of psychological empathy with their virtual bodies, um, that provides them an important perspective about being in the immaterial world. Um, in our regions, right? There's a kind of belief that when someone pass on or die, they will be able to come back to pay the last visit to their body, and acknowledging they have already departed from their body, so that they can actually move on. So in this installation, there's a sort of like a coffin setup. When user enter the space, there's a hidden camera that has already captured their face before they enter the space. The audience are invited to open the cover of the coffin, and they will see their face being merged with a virtual body. So literally, they see themselves. I want them to have the experience of seeing themselves in the coffin. Yeah. I want to challenge the audience perceptions of body ownership, which is the fundamental aspects of self-awareness. Um, and this idea of body ownership is very important, because it gives us the feeling that your body belongs to you and is constantly there, right? That's why, to reaffirm our existence, that we are living in this reality and we are not living in a dream. Sometimes we will slap ourselves or pinch your skin, so that you can feel and sense the pain, right? It is this sensorial perceptions of the reality that reinforce our understanding of being, right, as someone contained in your body. But in order to put the audience in that shoes, or in that standpoint, I need to give them this experience which allows them to pull themselves out from their body. Right, think about this in relation to cyberspace. In this world where electronic media proliferate, the life is typified by a certain disembodied lifestyle, right? We are no longer imprisoned in the containment of a body, but we can reach out to the other world, right? And the rest of the activities are just a representation of, you can hug someone, you can poke someone without any sensory perceptions. But I also want the audience to think that when we die, we basically leave behind, right? With this embodied lifestyle, we leave behind a body, but also a massive body of information. So body ownership is a fundamental aspect of consciousness or self-awareness, the feeling that your body belongs to you and is constantly there, right? These installations give the audience an opportunity to experience other psychological states, such as dream, hallucinations, to think about where they can enter, right? Another dimensions that they can and that they can enter. Um, but it has been enabled by technology such as Telerobotic as well, that allows us to externalize ourselves to include remote tools like robotic arms, that phenomenologically become part of our body as well, right? As much as we would think of a mobile phone as part of our body organs right now, right? These are some of the experiment that leads to the final installations in the gallery. This is sort of like playing the final tribute to the body and announcing that we are now officially entering the cyberspace. There are three spaces involved in the installation. The first one, before the audience enter, is called Nobody. And the space, the black box where this piece of coffin is sitting, is called the Somebody. And then there's a wall projections, which is called Everybody. According to Mantovani and Riva, they propose a cultural concept of presence as a social construction. Yeah, it's a core which is called the core presence, the sense of being together in a shared space, all right, with the awareness of others. So to give you an example, the core presence in cyberspace, like, Facebook, for example, right? You can experience a certain amount of social presence or the nearness of communications partner with very minimal physical stimulation. So in this wall projections, user will see all their faces being updated on this so-called the social wall, right? This is sort of like a record of everybody who has come to visit their body in the funeral, all right, or pay tribute to the body. Yeah, so here I have I'm actually working on a reconstruction of this installation because this piece has just recently acquired by the National Art Gallery. So I'm asked to reconstruct this as a permanent collections in the National Art Gallery. So I'm trying to incorporate, I'm actually in the process of reworking on this piece, and I'm trying to use a generative advisory network, or GAN, right, to learn about all this portrait, because I have some new revelations, to understand that we actually become who we are by learning who we aspire to become and who we might not want to be. So I want to use machine learning to actually convey that kind of learning process. So here I have a video of a work that's currently in process. So I'm going to stop here. What I'm doing here, what I'm experimenting is actually, I revisited this pool of data that I've collected 12 years ago, and I'm training the image to become myself, using myself as a base for the reference. So here I have another reflections on today's interconnected self. I'm looking at the idea of a network portrait, which are formed by us. The network condition is based on two fundamental elements. One is we are actually living a breadth or growing wealth of data, all right, while we are doing all our daily activities on the cyberspace, in the cyberspace. There's also a multitude of users contributing to this datascape as well. So data bodies are direct outcomes of informational society, which is our marks of communication, our transactions, our online transactions, our cyber movements. But data bodies and network portraits are two sides of the same coins. They're both the image of ourselves and also a consciousness shaped by us, right? I'm asking the questions of how can we recognize this as an extension of our consciousness. So I'm looking at the idea of trace, right, as a concrete, that's comparable to a mark in a physical reality. This is a project called Super Corridor. It's a mark that our nation is entering into cyber development. So all this project that's related to cyber and technology, it's called a cyber corridor. We have the North Corridor, we have the Southern Corridor. So that's why I call this a super corridor. Also because this piece was actually installed at the walkway along the corridor. It was actually an ambient display that promotes a moment of reflections using time and present as key parameters. So the interaction is pretty simple. It just capture all the activities that happens in this corridor. So these are some of the data portrait that I've collected using the analogy of a footprints on the seashore. Just like you walk, along the beach, you leave behind a footprint, and every now and then new waves will actually come up and wash away the record. Yeah, so the records are always in transients, even though I have a permanent record of this data, but on visually, the record of the movement will be recorded every 15 minutes. This is a project back in 2009. I, as part of a result of residency projects in Japan, Tokyo, the Chinese character on the right-hand side means listen to your life. Yeah. So literally, in our society, we have this belief sometimes when you need to live your life to a certain serendipity, right? You can't control your life all the time. So here, as a result of the residency, I created a performance where I play the role of a master fortune teller. I set up a stations and I scan the handprint, right? The palm of the audience who comes and asks for fortune telling. Yeah, but instead of giving them an oracle, I compare the lifeline of their hands and and identify a path or a road in their environment, and I play back the sound, right, that I have collected from that path or the road itself. So in this piece, I'm examining the meaning of fate and destiny, and also questioning the nature of reality and our understanding of it, right? Transcending the science and mediated by technology. Operation Cassava, it's my ongoing project. It started in 2013. This is also what brought me to Jane. We were working together, I think last year, at the end of last year, on a project called Phytopia, right? Initiated by Science Gallery Museums in Bengaluru. Yeah. It started off as a personal attempt to archive my grandmother's oral stories of their generations surviving through the Japanese occupations in the Second World War. So in most of the dining situations at home, she always talk about, younger generations do not appreciate the food, while they were suffering from food rations and a shortage of food during Japanese occupation, and they survived by eating this product of a plant called cassava. Yeah, in our native language we call it ubi kayu. It's sort of like a potato. Yeah. So this is when I start looking at digital archiving. The digital archive is still online. It's called opscassava.com. They invited you can always go in and submit an entry of a memory that has relation to food, or specifically relation to this particular food called cassava. So here in this project, I outlined a vision of online archive that enable storage and access of memory. It started off as a personal memory of family archiving, but later on it became an archive of social memory in the form of still images, sound, text related to cassava plant for its rich cultural history in the country. So it sort of become a visual diary of our nation's collective past. So I'm looking at the social and cultural significance of cassava, and using this platform to collect stories and memories related to the evolution of the plant through its migratory process. All right. Also using this opportunity to draw a parallel between the diaspora and the dispersal of meaning over the internet. When I started this project, the country entered a political turmoil where we are a society made up of multiracial and multi-ethnic, but we come to a point where people start fighting with each other and questioning the origin, yeah, of a different ethnic group, and the problematic questions, right? Or the prevalent questions at that time was who came to this land first, yeah. So I was drawing this parallel with the diaspora of this foreign plant, right, that was introduced into the region, but has been very much localized. Yeah, it is not a native food. It's not a native plant, but it's actually a plant that has been introduced into the country during the old time trading, right? So I was sort of using this project to ask the nation to look beyond the past and move on, right? So this is the installation setup of Operasi Cassava. On the ground, you see the cassava roots that has been connected to some kind of sensors, and these sensors are actually detecting the vitality of the roots, basically the moisture level, and the moisture level modulate the way the texts are being extracted and mined from the archive, online archive. Yeah, that's sort of like a representation of a memory. But when the plants, when the roots died off or dried off, you will see the text or the memory fade off as well, right? So I was talking about asking the nations to look beyond the past and also move forward. So by moving forward, it means um, they have to come to the installations and contribute a new memory to the archive. So when they tweet, when they submit an entry to the archive, it actually activate the lights and also the watering system in this tank, and it will nurture a new plant, you know, as a symbol of a birth of a new nation. This project, it's also coincide with a time in my practice when I try to run away from a very anthropocenic or zoocentric view of consciousness, and I diverted to plant. Yeah. Even though it's in the form of an aesthetic objects, but Alprasi cassava is represented as an embodiment of humans. I look at this as an extensions of myself, of my family, of my nation, right? With the memory of, you know, all this community and society that we built together. So the project is built on the premise that plant, you know, can also be an extension of body, but at the same time, they are also an autopoietic and agentic being form, same as human. They're self-referential, they have a history. They also react selectively to their phenomenon surroundings. So this project has been exhibited in several galleries in the country and also in Korea. So each time the plant respond differently. Some manage to make it, some die halfway before the exhibition comes to an end. The I'll go back to the discussions of the dichotomy between the mind and body, yeah, or the embodied experience or disembodied experience. It can be summed up as a relationship between the two sides, here and there, right? At this point of time, I was looking at presence theory that provides a framework for speculations, yeah, on the role of media technology in respect to the relational properties in both physical and virtual world. But due to the fuzzy boundary between the physical reality and the virtual reality, as well as the internal and external world, it's very difficult to pinpoint where is the elementary particles of here. But to represent this in a diagram, it just as an as a visualization, right? I regard this figurative thought as a recognizable derived from self as a starting point of actual presence, right? From where we can measure the spatial proximity of other types of presence. Right, so we are here in the physical reality, but anything beyond the monad is there, a world within a mediated reach, right, which is an extended range of human perceptions. So in the next project, I'm looking at sensors as the elements that impart our body, uh, or we can embody. Another way of saying we embody the sensors, and thus creating agency at different scale, right? That allows us to navigate on our behalf in the cyberspace. In 2013, I started to look at mapping, looking at GPS as a agency of body. So I've been using a tracking software in my mobile phone that tracks my daily movement. So basically, I just go about my daily life and let this software to record my movement. And later on, at the end of the year, as I visualize this as a data portrait. So it has resulted in a series of which I call the year-end report, which is basically lines drawings, all right, that were drawn by GPS. So from the visual, it kind of gives visualizations or depict, the daily rhythms in of my life, which form emergent self-portrait. So this is a portrait in different months. So here I'm looking at the GPS as a prosthesis that extends my hand into the virtual terrain that helps me to create a drawing that manifests visually in the virtual space and cognitively in mental space and physically in the live space. In one of the exhibitions, I actually turned these visualizations into a video, and I projected this on a Petri dish. Yeah, sort of giving you the idea of different perspective of view, right? From a macro perspective to a very micro perspective of life. So here I have a video of the projections on the Petri dish. So I'm just going to stop here. This is quite a recent work as well. It's exhibited in 2019 in President Archive in South Korea. Here I'm looking at the concept of post-virtual. Post-virtual is actually an extension of post-internet, where we start to see digital data, all right, or any artifacts that were born fundamentally as digital. They were being brought back into a physical reality, right? But fundamentally, these properties, on an ontological level, they are different from any physical material that we find that originates from physical reality. So even though they exist as physical, in the physical form in the reality, but originally they were born as a digital. So in this project, I have been using soundscapes an audio archive that I obtained from the President Archive in South Korea, and turning this into a visual, a physical sculpture, right, by using digital fabrications technology. So in the installation, there is sound sculpture. Basically, this is fabrications of the sound wave that I got from the FFT analysis of the sound, and using laser cut to cut every sound wave into wood pieces and join them back together as a sculpture. There's also a 3D printed what do you call it? I call it the datascape of the sound. Right. I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation. Before I end the presentation, I'm just going to show you two video. Right. This is the early version of Operasi Cassava.
바나나 주사를.
This is one of the manifestation of Operasi Cassava. This is Operasi Cassava 3.0. It's actually, I turned the whole archive into a performance on stage. And in the performance, I actually cook a cassava dish, based on my grandmother's recipe. And all these cooking utensils on the stage were connected to different sensors that activate different sound component. So the music that you hear is actually sort of like a record, all right, of the performance itself. This is the exhibition setup. Right. So whenever you see a flicker on the UV light, that indicates a new entry, right, coming through the archive system. This is the Phytopia version, which both me and James are in. Because of the pandemic, we cannot actually go to the science gallery and exhibit. So we were asked to think of, how can this be presented over the internet. So in this version, I'm doing a streaming, and some of this data were actually modulated by the plants in my garden. So this is the last video I'm going to show. So in this version, we were also using an internet crawler that crawl over the internet and search for images that's related to cassava disease. Yeah, it's as a response to the COVID pandemic. All right, that's the end of my talk and sharing. I hope it's not too dry and boring.
No, not at all. That was fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.
My computer's in the way of my emoji for clapping, so I have to do it. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. That was a really interesting talk. Yeah, and we've got some people thanking in the chat as well. So I invite people, I think at this point we're streaming on YouTube. So we have Eva who's looking at YouTube for any questions. And we also have the chat open in Zoom. So if anybody has any questions, I'll definitely ask your questions as I see them. But to get us started, if you don't mind, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Yeah, it's first of all, it's really great to hear you talk about this. And it's lovely to see how this project Operasi Cassava has been evolving for so long. And I think it's really fabulous. There was a few things that you mentioned that I thought were really interesting, and it's something that I'm finding really interesting in my own research. And it's this idea of having a really anthropocentric or a zoocentric sort of viewpoint, and everything that you talk about in your past is really about humans and placing humans at the center. And it feels as though you're beginning to start to see sort of these Cassavas as center, but it's still framed within human oral histories. And the plant itself, which I think is really interesting, is, has had a diaspora. It's been transplanted. It's sort of existing now it's a foreigner in this soil, yet it's become so absolutely important to the experience of Malaysian people and presumably other cultures who eat cassava. So I'm just, first of all, I think the complexity is really interesting. And I think that there's a lot of levels there that are really interesting to think about. But there was one wording that I was hoping, there's a few questions I have here, so I'll just ask them one after the other. But you talk about autopoietic, and it feels to me that, that the cassava and the human are more sympoietic. We're dependent on everything that's external to us in order for us to live. We're not autonomous at all, and we're really about relationships and taking the world into our bodies and expelling part of from our bodies to the world, which then helps cassava grow. I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about your thoughts on that, and whether or not that's made its way into this work at all, or if you see it being a future part of the work, or if you just your thoughts on that. It's really would be interesting for me.
Thank you for the questions, Jane. It's interesting and also timely because recently in the recent discussions with an artist friend, he also mentioned the work is more what's the word? Symbiosis.
Sympoietic.
Sympoietic, yeah.
Can you stop sharing your screen really quickly? Sorry, so we can see.
Sorry?
You. Could you stop sharing your screen so we could see you? Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, it started off with a framework of autopoiesis, which I mainly, explaining about the system itself, where there is a circular loop. Autopoiesis means an individual living system capable of reproducing and maintaining itself. So I was, making a reference to this framework to explain the circular loop, through the agents get carried through different level, from macro level to a meso level, the body, and also the micro level, right? The spatial cognitions in the brain itself. And using this framework to explain how different dimension of selfhood, right, or identity get carried into a cycle of iterations across different space through autopoietic. So this anthropocenic wheel of my whole attempt of working with plants is quite contemporary, is quite recent. Yeah, that's something for me to think about, how this is actually a symbiosis, relationship between the world and also the plant.
Yeah, no, I sort of feel like there's a number of elements that this plant is also receiving, but also giving. So there's that interrelationship that I find curious and interesting. But also considering that interrelationship, you also have set this plant up to modulate the sounds and in the text in some cases, like what text is showing. So this plant is playing a role in sort of what's being unrolled or unfurled within the gallery space. And then you're also saying that there's a feedback that people online, as they add to this archive, then nourishes the plant. So I'm curious though, if you have a whole bunch of people nourishing the plant or feeding the plant or watering the plant, what prevents people from hurting the plant? Is there any mechanism that's in place that protects the welfare of the plant? Is there any part of that system that does that? Or is that just something that you intervene and say, okay, that's enough, I got to stop that? Or was that even an issue? Or I was just curious about that part too.
Yeah, actually, the plant it's a very common plant in every household in Malaysia. Almost every home, at their backyard, they have, especially in the rural area. This is just like a wild plant that grows along the river. Nobody give a damn about this cassava plant. It's also a very resilient plant. It can grow in the harshest area that you can find, as long as there is a strong sunlight. So it grows very well in a tropical situation. It's considered as a resilient plant, and in the system, I did not intervene. I just leave it as how it is, to see how the plants respond to the situation, and also with all this IoT setup, how it actually resolve, in its own biological sense in response to this condition. The way for the plant to survive is to have enough feed, right, in the archive and also in the tweets. So that's the only condition for it to survive, because that entry into the archive systems will activate the UV light and also the water. Should anyone not participate in the projects of archiving, the plants will just died off. Yeah, I have. I think I have. I still have the. I still have the leftover of the plant that some survive until today, and some basically they just die, and I just keep the remains as a record of that plant's history in that institution or in that setting. I hope I answer your questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think it's really poetic how you're sort of forcing people to recognize sort of the cultural place that a lot of these plants, like, well, nature, I mean, without vegetal life, we exist, and without giving it the attention that it, the role that it plays, with not recognizing it and cherishing it, then it's easy to forget and then have it just disappear. So I really love the poetics. I was just curious because I'm creating something as well, and I'm curious about whether or not people will kill it just by giving too much attention.
Yeah, there's a lot of
so
moral and ethical issues, because we're dealing with the living things,
yeah,
right? We're working with a living thing. So in fact, the whole putting that exhibitions in the institution was challenging enough, because there's a living organism involved. The institution, it was the first time that they have something that's bio in the gallery, so they don't know how to deal with it.
that's always an issue.
Yeah.
But there's also a question of consent. I mean, would the Cassava plant want to be there if you were to ask it? But that's a whole new other level, which is something I wonder about. We work with nature. We're making assumptions about, we're taking it out of its environment, we're placing it into very human contexts, and I don't know, there's always an issue of consent in my mind that seems to get glossed over, but they live at such a different temporal reality, and it's just such a different type of living thing that it's hard to understand what are the ethics that govern those relationships, I think. But there's some questions online, so I want to definitely give time to that. We have, Ilse has asked, how can we maintain and sustain a connection to the natural world in increasingly digital domains? In a way, can we look at virtual linkages and meeting places as a new habitat in digital wilderness?
Yeah, I think.
If you'd like,
yeah.
If you like, I'll just
Right.
put it here. It's in the chat, so you can see it.
Okay. Yeah, I will address to that questions. Um, in the early days of cybernetics, I think all the cybernetics evangelists, they were trying to push all the lives as much as possible into the cyber world, assuming uh, um, we are able to transcend ourselves, right, and live in the cyber world. Um, there are another school of thoughts, which is the post-internet or the post-virtual, because we have to come to the understanding of the facts that we cannot leave behind. Yeah. So this is also a very recent reflections and also revelations. Even though at the beginning you can see that my works are paying tribute to the physical body and asking people to dump their body and go into the virtual world. But in my recent approach, you can see that I'm coming back to the physical reality, right? There are a lot of physical properties involved because I think in post a virtual, we simply have to understand the fundamental aspects of life. We cannot teach, we cannot live without this biological framework of the body. But what's more interesting is Catherine Hayes' propositions, of navigating the in-betweenness between the physical and virtual. That's why we have post-virtual, right? We have, with all this ubiquitous computing, IoT, we can't really differentiate, it's sort of like a cybernetic organism. We are also a cybernetic in a way because we can't live without the phone. It's almost like an extension of our body. So in a way, we're also a cybernetic in that sense. So I think it's not about choosing which realm, but it's more about navigating and maneuvering the in-betweenness, the in-between of virtual and physical.
Hmm. It's also asked another question. Do you see new strange habitats developing that are informed by the natural world? And does it need such influence? Here, I'll put it in. I think it's related to the last question as well. I've just put them in the chat for you.
How do you see this new strange habitat?
Chat's at, oh, can you see the chat? It's at the very bottom.
Yes, I can see.
So, Ilse, do you want to maybe, or Kavi, do you want to clarify what you mean by strange new habitats developing? I'm not certain if she's still here. She might not be here. I'm not certain if she's still here.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, a lot of strange things happening, a lot of strange habitat. The way I see the whole operasi cassava is a strange habitat in a way as well, because if we talk about memory institutions, we have those institutions that's canonizing the grand narrative, so-called, right? But this strange habitat of Cassava archive is a kind of habitat, that emerge in these situations. Of course, with the Web 2.0 and 3.0, where we can actually contribute back to the cyberspace. So all this pocket of habitat is actually happening in cyberspace. So I see, Cassava is also a kind of a strange habitat, which is an information habitat and also an informal archive, and also it has a cybernetic presence in the gallery as well. So yeah, in a way, yeah,
I would agree. Yeah.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any questions? I do have a couple of more, so okay. I'm just curious about the two projects. I'm not sure I took good notes, but the two, your data portraits and your GPS, your data bodies and your GPS portraits, the ones that you did the video, but you also have just the line drawings as well as the one that you showed earlier. I think it was called data bodies, where you were showing sort of your movement through space within cities. I found those really particularly beautiful, and I'm just wondering, how are they articulated in the real world, and are there any material versions of it rather than projection? Like, I don't know if you know of Phil Stern. He's an artist who works with glitch as a methodology, I guess, and he did these glitch portraits. He does glitch, like he did a glitch portrait of the COVID-19 genome, and then he weaves it into a very large blanket so that you can have these sort of glitch textiles that are just, I'm wondering, are there any physical, because you're now moving back into the post-internet, you're moving into the sort of very physical world, and it seems to me that these have a very drawerly quality to them. I can't see I can almost see the hand of the artist that's drawing it, sort of thing. Like and the quality of line and tonal quality. I'm just wondering, do you see these as physical things that can be in the world that share space?
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at that possibilities, but it has not been able to be realized up to this stage. But I'm definitely looking at the possibilities. One of the things I'm looking at, I forgot the names. There's this special culturing techniques that use UV light. So if you use the UV light, and of course you need some. That's again another ethical questions. You need some organism like fungus or bacteria that respond to UV light. So one of the ideas is actually using my movement. And that's using a laser to actually draw on the algae, so and see how the microorganism would actually manifest. Definitely, that's one of the things that I'm looking at.
Yeah, too bad Professor Joel Ong isn't here. He's doing some very interesting work in this field as well. Sorry, I've got a dog here who's making lots of noise. Okay, well, I'm wondering if there's any other questions, either on YouTube or in the chat, or anybody? Okay. Well, I think we've come to the end of this wonderful talk and conversation. If everyone is going to be silent, then I'm going to call it a day. And thank you very much for coming here, Kok Yoong, and being with us and sharing your wonderful practice. We're very excited, and we've got some people saying thank you and thumbs up and all sorts of accolades. So thank you very much. Very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be able to share with your faculty, and yeah, stay safe and take care, everyone.
And maybe I'll just stay on the line with you very quickly and let everyone jump off, and we can just chat about something really quickly.
Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone, and take care. I'll let everyone, I'm going to stop recording as well.